Ashlyn Watkins made massive strides for South Carolina's women's basketball team this past winter, to the point where I think that she could break records for the Gamecocks this next season.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I'm Andrew Lyon, the host of this podcast, and also a staff writer for Gamecock Digest over on Fan Nation. Thank y'all so much for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen or watch for your team here today. We are free and available both on YouTube and wherever you get your audio podcast daily. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. And that's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team both faster and for free. So post your job for free today at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions do apply. Hope that y'all have had a great start to the work week here on this Monday evening. Want to talk a little bit more about South Carolina's women's basketball program on today's show, and more specifically, one of their returning players in forward Ashlyn Watkins. Because as good as Ashlyn Watkins was in spurts this past season, especially when she got a bigger role in the rotation, I think that Ashlyn Watkins could reach new heights in her junior campaign this next winter, to the point where I think that she could break multiple records. So let's start off with the first one that came to my mind, which is the offensive rebounding record. This is not just for SEC play. This is for the entirety of the season. As of this current moment, Aliyah Boston holds the all-time program record in this category with 150 offensive rebounds in one specific season. Now, the reason why I bring up this record is because Ashlyn Watkins was just 11 offensive rebounds away last season from cracking the top 10 all-time list. And she was 45 total offensive rebounds away from breaking the all-time record altogether. And the reason I bring up those margins is to really emphasize the fact that Ashlyn Watkins did all of that despite the fact that she was not a starter for this team for the majority of the season. It took a while for her to actually get that kind of role. Going into next season, I understand it's not a guarantee that Watkins is going to be starting, and some of y'all might think that's crazy, but listen, Chloe Kitts started the majority of this past season. Again, Sanaya Fagan, she's not going to just sit back and let everybody else get all those minutes in front of her. She's going to try to make a push for her starting job as well. But Watkins did everything she did last season, despite only playing an average of 20 and a half minutes per game. When Aliyah Boston set her all-time record of 150 offensive rebounds, she played an average of 28 and a half minutes per game, or 276 total more minutes than Ashlyn Watkins did this past season. So with the athleticism and the explosiveness that Watkins possesses, plus having another year of experience under her belt, including some starting experience, I think that Ashlyn Watkins could absolutely be somebody that breaks this all-time record this next winter. Now, another record that I think Ashlyn Watkins could definitely break, or in this case, Ashlyn Swatkins, is the all-time SEC regular season blocks record. Now, I know that's a mouthful, but basically how many blocks a person can get against SEC competition in the regular season. The record here is 57, held also by Aliyah Boston. And Ashlyn Watkins, this past season alone, recorded 37 total blocks in SEC play during the regular season. In the 2021-22 season, when Aliyah Boston set her all-time mark, she played 161 more minutes than Ashlyn Watkins did this past season. So again, you get where I'm going with this. I'm working under the assumption that Ashlyn Watkins is going to get a lot more opportunities this upcoming season to really showcase her full skill set. And her strengths obviously lie on the defensive end. And while up to this point, Watkins has clearly benefited from the athleticism advantage and obviously the overall length advantage it could give her when she's going up against her individual opponent, I think that, again, when you talk about the extra minutes now she has under her belt, the starting experience, being able to read the entire floor maybe a little bit better than maybe she did when she was just joining the program a couple of off seasons ago. When you take all of that into account, I think it is very easy to see Ashlyn Watkins etching her name at the top of multiple records this next season for South Carolina. Now, I want to stick with the women's basketball program a little bit longer and talk about what last weekend means for this program and also for the university as a whole, as the Gamecocks hosted the WNBA's Las Vegas Aces and the Puerto Rico women's national team for an exhibition game. We'll talk about all of that in just a few moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team both faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. In other words, if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free today. Terms and conditions do apply. Welcome back to this Monday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day. And as always, a big thank you to each and every one of you everydayers who make the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your daily listen, wherever you get your audio podcasts daily, or your daily watch on YouTube. South Carolina's women's basketball program hosted a big-time exhibition match this past weekend as the WNBA's back-to-back defending champions and the Las Vegas Aces came to Columbia to take on the Puerto Ricans women's national team. Now, obviously, the fact that A'ja Wilson, a Gamecock legend, probably the best player in program history, plays for the Las Vegas Aces and is arguably right now the best player in the entire WNBA, that probably helped out South Carolina's case a good bit here. I definitely acknowledge that. But I do also think that this exhibition game, it is a strong signal of the widening reach that South Carolina's women's basketball program has. Think about it. When the Las Vegas Aces schedule these preseason matchups, obviously there's a lot of factors that go into it. You want to make sure that your team is adequately prepared and ready for the upcoming regular season. But at the same time, you're also trying to garner fan interest. And usually that means that obviously the Las Vegas Aces are probably going to have a game or two regionally over there on the western part of the United States. But they're also going to be trying to get people to watch, through the WNBA League Pass or whatever they use to broadcast these games. So the fact that they are willing to make a trip all the way over to the University of South Carolina, and ownership, I believe the owner is Mark Davis, who also is the owner of the Las Vegas Raiders, the fact that they're not worried about, any potential revenue losses, but maybe by having this game all the way on the opposite side of the country, I think that really should tell you a lot about what people in the women's basketball sphere think about South Carolina. And then you take in the fact that the Puerto Rican women's national team also participated in this exhibition game. Again, obviously, it's a good test for the Las Vegas Aces to face international players in this case, but the fact that Columbia, South Carolina, the Colonial Life Arena, that is the spot where they chose to have this game, I think it just says a ton about where South Carolina is heading as a brand. And, admittedly, for the longest time, a lot of people have felt like that women's basketball, they could not get to a point where maybe that sport could carry an entire university. Obviously, we have seen that is not the case. It could definitely help to carry the image and perception of an entire school. It's done that with UConn, obviously in conjunction somewhat with the men's basketball program, and also with the Tennessee Lady Volunteers when Pat Summitt was the head coach there. And now we're seeing it again with South Carolina's women's basketball program and the University of South Carolina. It says a lot that after all this time, after everything that Dawn Staley has done here, that South Carolina's now reached the point where they have got national teams from other countries that are coming here. When they have got the defending back-to-back champions in the WNBA coming to their facility to have an exhibition game before the regular season gets underway. It really says a lot about, obviously, the growth of the game, but also, at the same time here, the growth of South Carolina's image, the perception, the branding, everything that goes into it all in one. It says a lot about where the program has taken the school to this point. And obviously, I think there's still a higher ceiling that it can even reach with Dawn Staley still being the head coach here at South Carolina. Now, speaking of ceilings, we got to talk about the baseball program because this past weekend was rough in multiple different ways. And it's going to hurt South Carolina both in the short term and also potentially long term. And there are just some realities that we have to start facing. We have to start addressing with what that program has done, what's happened around the program, and where it could be heading. We'll talk about all of that in a few moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. So you thought the Denver Nuggets were done. Well, it appears that that's not the case, as the Nuggets have now notched things up at 2 games apiece with the Minnesota Timberwolves in the Western Conference semifinals. And so now people are once again confident that the Nuggets could potentially make it back to the NBA Finals and even win it all. But FanDuel is still a little bit hesitant to put them at the very top, as they have set the Denver Nuggets NBA championship odds at plus 360. So put some money on them right now because they're scorching hot, heading back home against the Minnesota Timberwolves. They get past them, likely going to the finals. That could be some easy money right there for you to win. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your team every single day in just 30 minutes. All right, let's talk about what happened this past weekend in Founders Park as South Carolina's baseball team was swept by the then number 15 Georgia Bulldogs. And this sweep that the Gamecocks suffered, it changes everything for them, both in the short term regarding their postseason hopes for this year and also the long-term trajectory potentially of the program. So let's start off with the smaller picture here. Coming into this past weekend, a lot of people in the college baseball universe said that South Carolina and Georgia were basically fighting for a regional hosting spot in that series. Whoever wins, you're in a great position. Whoever loses, you probably just lost your chance to get a regional host qualifier. And again, in order to do that, you got to be a top 16 national seed. Both teams were listed in the top 16 by D1Baseball.com this past week. And obviously, again, we all saw what happened. Georgia's offense was just too much for the Gamecocks pitching staff to handle, and it led to a sweep. So South Carolina, realistically speaking, you're not hosting a regional. There's just no question about that, because unless you're going to go on the road and knock off the number 1 Tennessee Volunteers in Knoxville, or go to Hoover and go on a run there, which historically speaking, even when the team has been really, really good, we all know Hoover is a house of horrors for South Carolina's baseball team. So likely not going to pull off either of those paths, so you're not hosting a regional. That's the short-term picture. Now let's look at the bigger picture here. After seeing South Carolina get swept by the Georgia Bulldogs, I think it's fair to say right now that confidence in the program's current trajectory, it has plummeted, because this sweep, it's not very often that this happens to South Carolina. The last time South Carolina endured a sweep at home against an SEC foe was back in 2019 against the Vanderbilt Commodores. That was over 1,800 days ago, and that was in Mark Kingston's second season here in Columbia. He now, of course, is in really season 6, but year 7 at South Carolina. And since that last sweep took place, there's a lot of changes that have happened around South Carolina with teams that they play every other year or teams they play every year. So I want to run through some facts and honestly some hard-hitting opinions that you really cannot argue against right now. The Tennessee Volunteers, they're witnessing their most successful stretch in program history right now. They have made the Super Regional round each of the last 3 years, and they've had 2 College World Series appearances in the last 3 years. The Kentucky Wildcats, they've only made it to the NCAA tournament 8 times in their program history. South Carolina dwarfs that. But Kentucky is the team right now that is sitting in the top 3, and at certain points in the season, they've even been ranked number 1 in the entire country. Would have to imagine first-time program history they've ever pulled that off. Ole Miss and Mississippi State, since 2019, again, both of those programs have won a national title. 9 SEC teams have appeared in the College World Series. South Carolina is not a part of that list. Let's go to their arch rivals. Clemson is currently the number 4 team in the country, and they are very likely about to host a regional for the second year in a row under their second-year head coach, Eric Bakich, who was at Michigan 2 years ago before he took the job at Clemson. South Carolina, they have only hosted a regional as a national seed, top 16 overall seed, once under Mark Kingston. That was back in 2023, obviously, when the team was the number 15 overall seed. Now, I know some people are going to sit there and say, but they hosted in 2021. Here's the thing that some Gamecock fans forget about that, though. South Carolina was not even the number 1 seed in that regional. Old Dominion was. And the reason Old Dominion didn't host was simply because the NCAA basically did not think they could accommodate what all they were wanting them to do in the regional round. So they gave it to South Carolina because they knew they had the facilities to host everything. That was why South Carolina got to host in 2021. But as a top 16 national seed, they've only done it once since Mark Kingston took this job in 2018. If it was 2021, that would be one thing, but it's 2024. Mark Kingston has now been here for 7 years at South Carolina. And listen, I get it. The season's not over yet. Some things could still happen. But honestly, y'all, at this point, I think it's fair to say this baseball team, they are who they are, okay? You're not going to see anything drastically different. This is a team that has basically underperformed in the batting lineup, and I don't put down the players because, weirdly enough, a lot of guys year over year that were here last year have gotten worse. You put that on coaching, in my opinion. Fielding, not so great, and right now the lineup that they're trotting out there, it's not conducive for fielding because they don't have the bats waking up enough, especially when runners are on base. So fielding is not going to be great. And the pitching staff, I think if there's anything the fan base definitely knows by this point, after what's happened the last 2 weeks, this pitching staff ain't it. It's just not it. And again, I don't put down the players. I don't put down them at all. It is the head coach's job, and his staffs for that matter, to get adequate personnel in the offseason, whether that is recruiting in the high school ranks years ahead of time or going to the transfer portal and making sure you've got enough arms in case one or two guys maybe don't perform where you think they could the next season. You've got bodies there that can maybe make up for it. South Carolina definitely lost a ton of pitchers last season, but you're no longer in an era where you can get a free pass if the next season it falls off a cliff because the transfer portal now exists. So South Carolina is at a crossroads with its baseball program. I think that is absolutely fair to say at this very point in time. And in a lot of cases, I think that this is the head coach's last stand. When you look at the history that South Carolina has, the expectation the fan base has for the program, and where they're currently situated, I think that this is Mark Kingston's last stand. Because there's a realistic path where this team loses 9 straight to end the season. Losing 3 against Georgia. There's no midweek this week. Getting swept by Tennessee. That very easily could happen. Going to Hoover, losing first round or second round, and being bounced there. And then going to the regional round and going to a barbecue there. So if I do the math again, it actually might not even be 9 games. There actually might be a path where they could lose 10 games overall. I don't know the current setup for the SEC tournament, so I could be wrong on that. But the point is, this team could literally lose 9 or 10 games straight to end this entire season. If that happens, Ray Tanner, the athletic department, the administration, they don't have a choice. They have to make a change. There's no question. It is a tough sport. It's a tough league, and this is a job that has a lot of expectation. And that is why, despite everything good this team did last year, you have lost the good grace of the fans that quickly. And the fact that this team could not win a single game in a series where a regional host spot was on the line, they were at home facing a team under a first-year head coach, by the way. Wes Johnson has not built that Georgia program up over 3, 4, 5-year span. He's been there 1 year. Calendar-wise, even less than that. And they went in there and they controlled that series from the first inning onward. For a lot of South Carolina baseball fans, that is absolutely inexcusable. And quite frankly, again, with what that program has done, they have every right to feel that way. So it's going to be very, very, very intriguing to see what happens with this baseball team. How do they bounce back? Do they go out swinging against Tennessee? Do they make that a series? Or does this season fall completely off the tracks, and then after the season, a lot is going to change one way or another? I feel very strongly that I can say that at least. Don't know if it's going to be coaching, but obviously a lot of players are probably going to be gone after this season. The athletic department, board trustees, they've all got a tough decision to make. And I get it. It's not football. It's not men's basketball. It's not women's basketball. But South Carolina is a baseball state. Okay, South Carolina as a state, the Palmetto State, baseball runs deep. In the low country, Midlands, the upstate, North Carolina, the Carolinas, it is laden with baseball talent, laden with history between all the programs, all the colleges and universities that are in that region. And the fact that South Carolina right now ranks behind multiple programs in both those states and the SEC, it's not good enough. It's just not good enough. So we'll see what happens moving forward, and I'll end the conversation at that. With that being said, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. Hope that y'all thoroughly enjoyed today's show as always. What are y'all's thoughts on Ashlyn Watkins? Do you think she could be set to break multiple records this next season? What are your thoughts on the Las Vegas Aces and Puerto Rico's women's national team coming to town this past weekend, and what that says about the increasing reach of South Carolina's women's basketball program and the overall university brand as a whole? And lastly, what are your thoughts and opinions on the baseball team, where they're currently at, and what the trajectory is moving forward under Mark Kingston? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section if you watch today's show on YouTube, or you can shoot me a direct message on X at @ALion_SC if you listen to today's show on an audio podcast app. As always, thank y'all so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Monday, and I'll be sure to catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.